we are in the Garden of Gethsemane, the peaceful Garden of Gethsemane, where every horn should be outlawed. This is the place where Jesus came to pray the night before he knew he was going to be executed. And as he's praying to the Father, as you know, he says, prior to praying, he says to his disciples, "Stay up with me and pray. This is my greatest hour of need." What do they wind up doing? They wind up falling asleep on him a couple of times. Once again, this is another embarrassing detail they never would have invented. They make themselves look so bad by falling asleep on the Lord in his greatest hour of need. Jesus comes here with his disciples, and as he becomes sorrowful, even to the point of death, Matthew describes it this way. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And as you know, tradition has it that the rock that you just saw on the altar of this Catholic church, or All Nations Church, is the rock upon which Jesus was praying. We don't know that for sure, but that's what tradition says. "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Luke describes what happened to Jesus while he was in the garden, that he was under such stress, such duress, that he began to sweat drops of blood. Luke, being a medical doctor, did not know that that actually is a medical condition that we know about now, where under extreme stress one can begin to have blood mix with perspiration. And Luke obviously witnessed this because he couldn't have known it from a medical perspective, even though he was a doctor. This is an eyewitness account of what Jesus was going through right here in the garden. Luke didn't witness it, but Luke is using eyewitness testimony, as he says in the beginning of his gospel. He says, "I checked with the eyewitnesses." So how would they have known this unless they had witnessed it? Who would have thought you could sweat great drops of blood unless you witnessed someone do that? Now, in our book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we have a description of a medical doctor who wrote down what he thought the crucifixion actually was like. We don't have time to read it here, but if you have that book, or you can even Google it online and find a description of the crucifixion by C. Truman Davis. He's a medical doctor. When you read that, it'll take you probably 7 or 8 minutes to read what Jesus went through physically. It will overwhelm you. And he knew he was going to go through that physically. But what was the more severe suffering he would go through? It wasn't the physical. It was the idea that he was being forsaken judicially by the Father, that he would not have that same relationship for a period of time that he had from all eternity with the Father, because he was the lamb that went to slaughter for our sin. I mentioned this earlier, that there's only one place in the Scriptures where Jesus does not refer to God as Father. It's on the cross, when he quotes from the Psalms, when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Psalm 22. He was forsaken by the Father for our sake. He went to the cross for our benefit, not his own. That's why he says, it is not my will, but your will. I would hope this cup could be taken from me, Father, but if it can't, not my will, but your will. Now, how often do we, living comfortably in the West, say that? Not my will, Father, but your will. We can't even stand for Jesus on Facebook or Instagram because we're afraid we're going to get some blowback online. And yet here Jesus is putting his life on the line, voluntarily taking our punishment on himself, and yet we can't stand in the most trivial way for Jesus. He put us on this earth not to just take up space, but to know him and to make him known. So one thing we need to continually remind ourselves of is the kind of sacrifice that Jesus made. Not just the physical sacrifice, but the emotional, psychological sacrifice that he made, being separated from the Father.